The courtroom was filled with an electric tension, every seat taken, every eye focused on the young girl standing at the defendant's table. Maya Brooks, only 17, stood tall with a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the condescension that had filled the room just moments earlier. She had been mocked by Judge Patterson for daring to represent herself in a case that most adults wouldn't even dare to touch. His sharp tongue had torn her apart, belittling her for her youth and inexperience. "You think you can fool this court?" Judge Patterson had sneered, his laughter echoing in the courtroom. "This is a courtroom, young lady, not a school play." But Maya had stood her ground, her calm demeanor in stark contrast to the sharp words aimed at her. As the trial went on, the defense crumbled under the weight of her knowledge. Maya wasn't just a teenager. She was a legal prodigy. She had read law books for fun since she was 7 and had been debating college students by the time she was 12. Yet she had kept this a secret from everyone, including the court. As Maya began to dismantle the prosecution's case, citing legal precedents and expertly laying out her arguments, the courtroom fell into stunned silence. Even Judge Patterson, who had so ruthlessly mocked her earlier, began to lose his smug composure. His expression shifted from one of arrogance to one of confusion and growing unease. "I object," one of the prosecutors interrupted, his voice rising with frustration. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe this individual is not who she claims to be." The room fell silent as the prosecutor's words hung in the air. Maya turned her piercing gaze toward him, and with a faint smile she responded calmly, "Your Honor, I can provide my credentials if necessary. But I assure you, every word I've spoken is legally sound. Shall we continue?" The judge's face turned crimson as he stammered, "Who are you?" His voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. Maya remained unfazed. She reached into her satchel, pulling out a pristine document. The paper was passed up to the judge, and as he read it, his hands trembled. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The audience waited in breathless anticipation. The truth was out. Maya was not just a high school student trying to help a woman in need. She was a certified legal prodigy who had passed the bar exam at just 16. The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderclap, and the judge slammed his gavel against the bench in an attempt to restore order. "This court is adjourned for a 10-minute recess," he stammered, clearly needing time to process what had just unfolded. Maya sat back, her heart pounding, but she didn't let the moment rattle her. This was just the beginning. The story of how Maya Brooks ended up in that courtroom began far away from the grandeur of legal battles and high stakes. It began in the quiet suburbs of Chicago, where Maya, a 17-year-old teenager, lived with her grandmother, Clara. Unlike most teens, Maya wasn't interested in the usual hobbies or socializing. Her heart was in law, and she had been devouring law books since she could remember. Her grandmother, Clara, a retired schoolteacher, had always reminded her to use her gifts for good. "Humility and wisdom, Maya," she would often say. "Remember to stay grounded and help others." Maya took her grandmother's words to heart. Despite her remarkable intelligence, she preferred staying under the radar, never drawing attention to her abilities. That was until one fateful afternoon when everything changed. Maya was helping Clara with the groceries when they stopped by a local corner store. It was there that Maya overheard a conversation that would forever alter the course of her life. A woman, clearly distressed, was talking to the cashier. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice shaking. "My landlord says I violated my lease, but I haven't done anything wrong. He's evicting me and my kids. I'm going to be homeless." Maya's heart sank. The woman, whose name was Teresa, was a single mother of 2 young children. She was on the verge of losing her home, but the details of the situation seemed unclear. Maya approached Teresa after the conversation had ended. "I couldn't help but overhear," she began gently. "What happened with your landlord?" Teresa explained her situation, tears welling up in her eyes. "He says there are too many people living in the apartment," she said, shaking her head. "But it's just me and my babies. He's lying because he wants to raise the rent for someone else. I've paid every cent on time." Maya's mind began racing as Teresa spoke. It didn't sit right with her. Something about the landlord's claims felt off. She asked Teresa if she had copies of her payment receipts in the lease agreement. Teresa nodded. "I keep everything in a folder at home." I can help you, Maya said firmly. Let me take a look at your documents. Teresa hesitated. But you're just a kid. I don't know how you can help. Maya smiled, trying to reassure her. I've been told that before. Trust me. Over the next few days, Maya pored over Teresa's documents. As she combed through the lease agreement and the payment records, her suspicions grew stronger. The landlord's claims were riddled with inconsistencies. Maya knew they had a case, but it wasn't just about standing up for Teresa. It was about doing what was right, showing the world that a teenager, no matter how young or how much she looked like a child, could make a difference. She wrote a formal letter to the landlord demanding that he cease the eviction, threatening legal action if he didn't comply. When the landlord ignored her, Maya helped Teresa file a case in small claims court. Word spread fast through the neighborhood. The local teenager, the one who always had her nose buried in books, was standing up for justice. People were intrigued, and soon local reporters picked up the story. Headlines across the small-town news outlets featured the child attorney who had taken on a landlord. But not everyone was impressed. Some questioned her qualifications, while others scoffed at the idea of a teenager taking such a serious matter into her own hands. But Maya didn't care about the doubters. She cared about one thing, helping Teresa. And she wasn't going to let anyone, especially a judge, take that away from her. As the court date loomed closer, Teresa grew more anxious. What if we lose? She asked, pacing nervously. I don't have money for a lawyer. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, Teresa, I've got this. Deep down, Maya knew this wasn't just about helping one person. This was about something much bigger. It was about standing up against injustice, proving that anyone could make a difference, regardless of age or background. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Spectators, reporters, and even some lawyers had come to see the teenage attorney in action. Maya stood confidently in a simple navy blazer and skirt, carrying herself with a quiet but undeniable poise. But as soon as she stepped forward to speak, Judge Patterson, the same man who had mocked her for weeks, interrupted her. Who are you supposed to be? He sneered. This must be a prank. The room filled with laughter as the judge continued to ridicule her, questioning her credibility and mocking her for her youth. The whispers in the crowd only made it worse. Yet Maya didn't flinch. She stood tall, her expression steady, waiting for the moment when she would speak. And when that moment came, she didn't back down. She presented her case with precision, citing legal precedents and showing that the landlord's claims were based on lies. It was clear that her words carried weight. The judge's smug expression began to fade as he realized Maya wasn't the naive child he had assumed. But the real shock came when she revealed her true identity. Maya Brooks, she said, handing over a document, a certified legal prodigy who passed the bar exam at just 16. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Judge Patterson's gavel slammed down, but the damage had already been done. Maya had won the first round, and her journey to justice was just beginning. The morning after Maya's revelation in court, the quiet suburbs of Chicago felt eerily still. The air was thick with tension, and even in the comfort of her own home, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that her fight for justice was only just beginning. After the courtroom chaos, Maya had retreated home with Clara, her grandmother, who had been her rock through all of this. Clara had been proud of her, of course, but Maya could see the worry in her eyes. It was the kind of concern that a grandmother might feel for a grandchild who was taking on the world and all its dangerous complexities. You did an amazing job today, sweetheart, Clara said, sitting down beside Maya on the couch, offering her a cup of tea. But I can see that this isn't over. You've got to be careful. Maya nodded, her gaze fixed on the cup in her hands. She had done something extraordinary, but the weight of the victory still hadn't fully hit her. The judge, her opponents, and even the spectators might have been in shock, but Maya knew what came next would be even harder. Over the next few days, the media attention surrounding her case exploded. Headlines across the city and even nationwide celebrated the teenage attorney who took down a landlord. Interviews and reporters were calling nonstop, wanting to know how a 17-year-old managed to pass the bar, let alone take on a case like this. She became a sensation almost overnight, but Maya wasn't interested in the fame. She only cared about one thing, winning for Teresa and making sure the landlord was held accountable. But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. Maya's sudden rise to prominence attracted both admiration and disdain. While some praised her as a hero, others questioned her qualifications. It wasn't just the public who was skeptical. There were deeper, darker forces at play behind the scenes. Teresa, for all her support, was becoming increasingly worried. Every day the pressure seemed to mount higher. She had her own life to worry about. The stress of trying to protect her children from being evicted while being thrust into the spotlight because of Maya's case. "Why are they doing this to us, Maya?" Teresa asked one evening, sitting in Maya's living room after the media circus had quieted down. "We didn't ask for this. We just wanted a safe place to live. Now we've got all these people watching us, and I don't know if we're going to make it through this." Maya looked at Teresa, her heart aching for the woman who had so much to lose. But there was a fire in her heart, too. A fire that had ignited the moment she first heard Teresa's story. "We're going to make it through," Maya said firmly. "I promise." It was then that Maya's next challenge emerged. As if the courtroom drama wasn't enough, Maya was hit with a new, even more unsettling surprise. One afternoon, while going over case files, she received a call from a private investigator named Lucas Harper, a name she had heard of in passing but never truly taken note of. It seemed that Harper was a notorious figure in the world of high-profile legal battles, known for using aggressive and shady tactics to intimidate and manipulate the system. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice smooth and calculated over the phone, "I've been following your progress in this little tenant case of yours. You might want to consider backing off for your own sake. People like me, we get things done. And people like you, well, let's just say they don't last long in our world." Maya's pulse quickened, but she didn't let her voice falter. "I'm not backing down, Mr. Harper. Not now. Not ever." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, as though Harper was contemplating his next move. "You've been warned," he finally said before hanging up. Maya hung up the phone, her hand trembling slightly, but her resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let a man like Lucas Harper intimidate her into silence. She had a mission, and that mission was to fight for justice, no matter the cost. The next morning, as if on cue, another bombshell arrived. Maya learned that the landlord, Mr. Reynolds, had filed a countersuit, claiming that Teresa's accusations had caused him emotional distress and irreparable harm to his reputation. It was a desperate and last-ditch attempt to turn the tables, but Maya knew it was just another ploy to distract from the real issue. "This is a joke," Maya said, looking over the countersuit papers with disgust. "He's trying to throw everything he can at us in hopes that we'll back down, but we're not going to. Not now." Maya had no intention of letting the countersuit sidetrack her. She continued to work tirelessly, piecing together her arguments, gathering additional evidence, and preparing for the next phase of the trial. But as the days passed, she began to realize that the opposition wasn't playing fair. They were pulling out all the stops, using dirty tricks and intimidation tactics to try and discredit her and shut her down. It was clear that they knew Maya was a threat, someone who could expose everything they had been getting away with for years. As if things weren't complicated enough, Maya received an unexpected visit one afternoon. A man knocked at her door, presenting himself as a reporter from a local news outlet. But something about him felt off. The man asked a series of invasive questions about Maya's case and her legal background, trying to pry into her personal life. Maya immediately recognized it for what it was, a deliberate attempt to dig up dirt and create doubt about her credibility. She politely but firmly refused to answer any further questions and sent the man on his way. But the encounter left her with a nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't just about a case anymore. It was about something much bigger. And the more Maya pushed for justice, the more dangerous it became. By the time the day of the next hearing arrived, Maya was more determined than ever. The countersuit would be dealt with, the landlord's tactics exposed, and she would continue to fight for Teresa, no matter what it took. She was prepared for the battle ahead, knowing that this was about more than just one case. This was about setting a precedent. This was about sending a message to anyone who believed they could get away with exploiting the vulnerable. The courtroom was packed once again as Maya entered, her heart steady, her mind focused. Judge Patterson called the proceedings to order, but it was clear the atmosphere had shifted. The stakes had grown higher. Maya had already proven she could stand her ground against seasoned professionals, but now the opposition wasn't just trying to defeat her, They were trying to destroy her. Maya stood tall at the defendant's table, her gaze unwavering as she prepared to face the next phase of the fight. The following days after the countersuit had been filed were filled with pressure. Maya could feel the walls closing in as the landlord's legal team threw every trick they had at her. But she had a fire in her heart, and that fire was only growing stronger. She knew the stakes had changed. It wasn't just a fight for Teresa's home anymore. It was a fight for something much larger, something that could affect many more lives than just theirs. As the trial progressed, Maya found herself facing new challenges. The landlord's attorney, Mr. Cole, had become increasingly aggressive. He'd begun playing up the emotional aspects of the case, trying to paint Teresa as someone who wasn't telling the truth. It was a typical tactic meant to discredit the plaintiff and distract from the facts. Maya was ready. She knew this wasn't just about what was happening in the courtroom. It was a battle of strategy. They wanted her to slip up, to lose her cool. But Maya had trained herself not to be rattled. Instead, she leaned into the facts, her legal arguments sharp and unrelenting. The defense presented new evidence, a pile of documents that seemed to support their counterclaim that Teresa had been hiding financial information. It was an obvious tactic to undermine her credibility, especially given the sensitive nature of the case. The courtroom fell silent as Mr. Cole handed the documents to the judge. "Your Honor," he began with a tone full of false certainty, "we believe this new evidence shows that the plaintiff, Teresa Carter, has been dishonest about her financial situation. The records here suggest income from unreported sources, which directly contradicts her claims of financial hardship." Maya's heart sank, but only for a moment. She immediately began scanning the documents, a practiced skill she'd honed from years of reading contracts and legal papers. Her eyes moved swiftly across the pages, finding inconsistencies as she went. When it was her turn to respond, Maya stood tall, her calm presence filling the room. She addressed the judge, her voice steady and firm. "Your Honor, I request time to review this new evidence thoroughly. We were not given any prior notice of its existence, and I'm sure the defense knows how important it is for this court to fully examine all documents before making any decisions." Mr. Cole objected immediately, his voice sharp and defensive. "Your Honor, this is merely an attempt by the plaintiff to delay proceedings. These documents are relevant to the case and should be considered immediately." Judge Patterson, looking somewhat weary from the ongoing tension in the courtroom, paused for a moment before addressing both parties. "Miss Brooks, I agree that you should be allowed the time to properly review this evidence. Mr. Cole, I will allow a brief recess, but we will continue afterward." Maya gave a small nod, turning back to her table. Her mind raced, but she didn't show it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She needed to prepare for the next round, and she wasn't about to let this new evidence deter her. Outside the courtroom, Maya found a quiet corner and pulled out her phone. She needed to call someone she trusted. Aaron. "Hey, Maya, what's up?" Aaron answered immediately. "They've presented new evidence. Something about Teresa's financials. It doesn't look good," Maya said, her voice low. Aaron's tone became serious. "You think it's legitimate?" Maya shook her head, even though she knew he couldn't see her. "Number. Something about it feels off. They're using this to distract us, to make Teresa look dishonest. I need you to dig into these records, Aaron. I need to know if there's any way we can discredit them." "I'm on it," Aaron said without hesitation. "I'll go through everything and get back to you." Maya ended the call and stood by the courthouse window, looking out over the city. The weight of the case felt heavier than ever. She knew it was only going to get more complicated, but she couldn't afford to back down. Not now, not after everything that had happened. Back inside the courtroom, the recess was called. Maya sat with Teresa, who looked worried but trying to remain composed. She squeezed Teresa's hand, offering a small smile. "We'll get through this, okay? I'm not letting them take your home. We're going to win." Teresa nodded, though the fear in her eyes was undeniable. "I don't know how you do it, Maya. You're so strong. I don't know if I could fight like you." Maya leaned in, her voice soft but resolute. "You don't have to. I'm doing this for you, and for everyone else who's been treated like this. We're fighting for justice, and I won't stop until we get it." The judge's gavel came down, signaling the end of the recess. The tension in the room was palpable as the court reconvened. "Miss Brooks, have you had time to review the new evidence?" Judge Patterson asked, his gaze sharp as he looked down at her. Maya stood, her heart pounding. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady. "And after reviewing the records presented by the defense, I can confirm that they are fraudulent." Gas rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge seemed taken aback. "Fraudulent?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Maya nodded, pulling out a stack of documents she had been preparing during the recess. "Yes, Your Honor. These financial records presented as evidence are not only inaccurate, but they were also manipulated. I have consulted with a digital forensics expert who confirmed that the files were fabricated using a template software. Amateur work at best." She handed the stack of papers to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. As Judge Patterson flipped through the documents, his expression shifted from one of skepticism to one of disbelief. "These records were fabricated?" he repeated, his voice quieter now. "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied, her voice unwavering. "And I can prove it. Here is the metadata verification report from the forensics expert, detailing the discrepancies in these records, including the software used to create them." The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Judge Patterson absorbed the information. After several long moments, he looked up, his face hardening. "This is a serious accusation," he said, his voice gravely serious. "Mr. Cole, do you have a response?" Mr. Cole, now visibly rattled, stammered, "Your Honor, these records are legitimate. There must be some mistake. We need more time to review them." "Denied," Judge Patterson interjected, his voice cutting through the air. "I will not allow further delays. Miss Brooks, you may continue." Maya returned to her seat, her heart racing, but she refused to show any sign of vulnerability. This was the turning point. Her strategy had worked, and the defense was losing ground. "Your Honor," she continued, "I would like to submit additional evidence that further undermines the defense's claims." She approached the bench, handing over copies of emails between Teresa and the landlord, all of which contradicted his claims about the lease violations. Maya had already highlighted the key phrases in yellow to ensure nothing was missed. Judge Patterson looked over the new documents, his expression growing more serious by the second. "I see," he said, his voice cool. "Mr. Cole, unless you can provide concrete evidence to refute this, I will have no choice but to accept these emails as valid." Mr. Cole hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Your Honor, But the judge cut him off. "We've already spent too much time on this matter. Miss Brooks, continue." Maya knew they were close to victory. With each piece of evidence she presented, the landlord's defense crumbled. Her strategy was working. She was exposing the lies, the manipulation, the corruption, and it was only a matter of time before justice was served. As she prepared to present her closing arguments, Maya glanced at Teresa, who gave her a nervous but grateful smile. The fight wasn't over, but it was close. The battle for Teresa's future, and for the future of countless other tenants, was reaching its final chapter. And Maya was ready. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial neared its conclusion. Maya had presented her evidence methodically, each step of the way exposing the landlord's lies, uncovering his fraudulent tactics, and systematically dismantling his defense. Now it was time for the closing arguments. Maya stood at the defendant's table, her fingers clenched around the papers that held the key to the final blow. Teresa sat beside her, her face pale but hopeful, her hands trembling in her lap. Maya's gaze swept across the room. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the tension in the air, but she refused to let it rattle her. This was her moment. She had worked too hard, fought too long, to back down now. Judge Patterson entered the room, his usual stern expression in place. He banged his gavel, and the room fell into silence. "Miss Brooks," the judge said, his voice gravely serious, "it is time for your closing argument." Maya nodded, standing to face the judge, the gallery, and the defense. Her heart raced, but her voice was steady as she began. "Your Honor," she began, her tone calm but resolute, "this case is not just about one landlord trying to evict a single mother. It's not just about one family fighting to stay in their home. This case is about a pattern of abuse, a systemic problem that has been allowed to fester for far too long. My client, Teresa Carter, represents countless others who are being exploited by landlords like Mr. Reynolds. People who are told they don't matter, that their rights don't matter, and today we have the opportunity to change that. Maya paused, allowing her words to sink in. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her, but she pressed on. The defense has presented fabricated evidence. They've attempted to discredit my client, Teresa, by presenting financial records that were manipulated. They've tried to create doubt where there is none. They've called her a liar, a thief, someone unworthy of her home. But the truth, Your Honor, is undeniable. Maya's voice grew stronger with each word. She was no longer just representing Teresa. She was representing every person who had ever been silenced by a system that didn't care about them. She was standing up for the voiceless. Mr. Reynolds has lied. He has manipulated this court. He has taken advantage of people who were just trying to live their lives in peace. The emails, the metadata, the testimony we've presented, all of it shows the truth. And that truth is this: Teresa Carter is a victim of a corrupt system, and Mr. Reynolds is the one who should be held accountable. Maya turned toward Teresa, offering her a smile that was both reassuring and fierce. Teresa deserves justice. She deserves to be treated with dignity, and the court has the power to make sure she gets it. She returned her gaze to the judge and the rest of the courtroom. This case is about more than just a home. It's about the principle of fairness. It's about standing up to those who think they are untouchable. And it's about making sure that no one is above the law. As Maya finished her closing argument, the courtroom remained silent. The judge nodded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betraying a hint of respect. Judge Patterson cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Thank you, Miss Brooks. You may be seated." Maya sat back down beside Teresa, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done all she could. The rest was in the judge's hands now. The defense didn't have much left to say. Mr. Cole rose, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier in the trial. He attempted a final appeal, citing Teresa's alleged financial discrepancies and emphasizing the emotional distress caused to his client, Mr. Reynolds. But it felt hollow, like a desperate attempt to hold on to a losing battle. "The defense has had their chance," Judge Patterson said, cutting Mr. Cole off. "We will adjourn for the day, and I will deliver my ruling in 3 days. Court is adjourned." Maya stood up, her legs shaking with the adrenaline of the final argument. She exchanged a look with Teresa, who gave her a small, tearful smile. "We did it, Maya," Teresa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We really did it." Maya nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to believe it was over, but she knew better. This fight wasn't just about winning in court. It was about the bigger picture, the changes that needed to be made, the tenants who still needed a voice. And as the gavel came down, signaling the end of the day's proceedings, Maya couldn't help but feel that the true battle was just beginning. 3 days later, Maya walked into the courthouse with Teresa at her side, her hands shaking slightly. The air was thick with anticipation as they waited for the judge to deliver his verdict. Reporters swarmed the hallways, eager to get a glimpse of the teenager who had captured the nation's attention. But Maya barely noticed. All that mattered to her was Teresa. She had fought for her, and now all they could do was wait. When Judge Patterson finally entered the courtroom, the room fell silent. He walked to the bench, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. The weight of the moment hung in the air. "After reviewing all the evidence and testimony presented in this case," Judge Patterson began, his voice steady, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Teresa Carter." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at Teresa, who gasped and clutched her hand. "The eviction is hereby voided, and the landlord, Mr. Reynolds, is ordered to pay restitution for the emotional and financial damages caused by his actions." The courtroom erupted in applause, but Maya didn't hear it. She was too busy staring at the judge, her mind trying to process the words. The fight for Teresa's home was over, and they had won. Judge Patterson continued, his voice firmer now. "In addition, I am referring Mr. Reynolds for further investigation into charges of perjury, evidence tampering, and other misconduct. The court will not tolerate the manipulation of this system for personal gain." Maya stood tall, her chest swelling with pride. She had done it. She had won. As Teresa hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face, Maya felt a surge of relief. This wasn't just her victory, it was their victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been silenced, for everyone who had ever been wronged by a system that didn't care. As they left the courtroom, Maya felt the weight of the journey beginning to lift. It wasn't the end of the fight, not by a long shot, but it was a start, and that was enough. That evening, at home, Maya sat in the quiet of her room, staring out the window. Her phone buzzed with messages and calls, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. She was still processing everything that had happened. Clara entered the room, a cup of tea in hand. She sat beside Maya, her arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. "You did it, Maya," Clara said softly. "You really did it." Maya nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "We did it, Grandma. We've only just begun." Clara smiled, a proud gleam in her eyes. "I've always known you were meant for great things. You've got a gift, Maya. Now it's time to use it to help others." Maya smiled back, determination setting into her bones. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done fighting. The battle for justice had only just begun, and she was ready for whatever came next. The days following the trial were a whirlwind of interviews, congratulations, and an outpouring of support from people all over the country. Maya's victory had become more than just a local headline. It was a symbol of hope for those who had been marginalized, silenced, or oppressed. People who had suffered in silence were reaching out, sharing their stories and expressing their gratitude for Maya's unwavering determination to seek justice. But amidst the celebrations, Maya remained focused. She knew that the victory in the courtroom wasn't the end of the journey, it was just the beginning. She had won Teresa's case, but the fight against the system of corruption and exploitation was far from over. The legal battle had shone a light on the many issues within housing laws, tenant rights, and the way landlords like Mr. Reynolds had been able to exploit their power. Maya's phone was flooded with calls, messages, and emails. People across the country were asking for her help, hoping that she could be the voice they had never had. There were families facing eviction, tenants being exploited, and people who had been denied justice simply because they didn't have the resources to fight back. Maya had always known that there were systemic problems, but now she was being asked to be part of the solution. One evening, as Maya sat at the kitchen table with Clara, she shared her growing concerns. "Grandma," Maya began, "I don't know how to do this on my own. There are so many people who need help. I want to keep fighting, but I can't take on every case." Clara, ever wise, gave her a soft smile. "You don't have to do it alone, Maya. You've got a gift, but you're also part of a community. You can build something bigger, something that can make a real difference for everyone." Maya thought about it long into the night. Her mind raced with ideas, possibilities, and the weight of what she had already started. She realized Clara was right. She couldn't carry the burden alone, but she could create something, a movement, an organization that could help people like Teresa and so many others who didn't have the resources to stand up to the system on their own. And so the seed for the Justice Collective was planted. Maya reached out to local lawyers, activists, and nonprofit organizations dedicated to tenant rights and housing reforms. She assembled a small but dedicated team, including Aaron, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, helping to set up a website and social media presence for the initiative. Teresa, too, wanted to give back and offer her support to others in similar situations, volunteering her time and resources to help those in need. Together, they built an organization that would offer free legal aid to tenants, provide resources for those facing eviction, and fight against the exploitation of vulnerable families by corrupt landlords. The Justice Collective grew quickly, fueled by the passion and determination that Maya had always carried. It became a force for change, shining a light on the systemic issues that had long gone unaddressed. But the battle didn't stop there. One evening, while Maya was working late in the office of the Justice Collective, she received an anonymous call. A man's voice on the other end of the line was cold and threatening. "You think you've won, Maya," the voice said, "but you're poking at something much bigger than you realize. People like you'll never change the system." The line went dead before she could respond. Maya stared at her phone for a moment, then calmly set it down. The threat didn't faze her. In fact, it only solidified her resolve. She had already made a difference. And now she had an entire community behind her, people who believed in justice, in fairness, and in standing up for what was right. The world might try to intimidate her, to silence her, but Maya knew one thing for certain. She wasn't backing down. Lesson from the story. Maya's journey is a powerful reminder that one person can make a difference, no matter their age, background, or circumstances. In a world where injustice often seems overwhelming, Maya's story teaches us that standing up for what's right can spark a ripple effect that changes lives and communities. The core lesson from Maya's journey is courage in the face of adversity. Maya didn't let her age or the scorn of others deter her from her mission. Despite being mocked and underestimated, she kept moving forward because she knew that justice wasn't just a lofty ideal, it was something that could be achieved if enough people were willing to fight for it. Maya also exemplifies the power of knowledge and preparation. Her extensive understanding of the law allowed her to navigate a complex legal case and expose the truth. She didn't rely on luck or chance. She used her intelligence, resourcefulness, and strategic thinking to ensure that justice was served. It wasn't about having the loudest voice or the most power. It was about using the tools at her disposal in a meaningful and impactful way. Lastly, Maya's story teaches us about the importance of community. While she was the one in the courtroom, it was the support of others, her grandmother, her team, the people who believed in her, that made her success possible. It's a reminder that no one achieves greatness alone. We all have a role to play in creating positive change, and together we can accomplish what seems impossible. Maya's journey may have started as a fight for one woman's home, but it blossomed into a movement that empowered countless others to stand up for their rights, proving that even the smallest voice can echo far beyond its own reach.